Immigration policy should be generous, it should be fair, it should be flexible. With such a policy, we can turn to the world and to our own past with clean hands and a clear conscience. John F. Kennedy. All right. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time today. I would normally say so early, but this morning, as I was putting this show together, I just kept going deeper and deeper. And I was like, okay, yeah, we should add this too. And yeah, I should talk about this. And I should talk about this. And then before I knew it, it was like 7:27, or no, it was probably a little bit earlier than that. And I was like, there is no way this show can happen at 7:30. So I apologize, but hopefully it's jam-packed with lots of information, lots of arguments, lots of positions that will help you understand what a let's just call it a proper libertarian position is. So I'm doing this instead of a bill review, and we're going to discuss the civil unrest in Los Angeles, primarily from a libertarian perspective. So let me get some things out of the way here, just so that we're clear when I'm using terms or when you hear terms. There are going to be two broad ways to look at this. Okay. Now you'll have maybe differences within each one of them, but on terms of just a broader view, you're going to have my anarchist peers, and then you're going to have my libertarian peers. And they will not necessarily be the same. There will be some overlap. My anarchist peers, if you're not a libertarian, you might be confused because when you hear the word anarchy, you think of like, people running in the streets, shooting each other, just all kind of lawlessness and just all whatever goes, right? Like, if whoever's got the biggest gun. In our community, that's not what anarchy means. That just simply, it's the crowd of people that do not see government of any kind as legitimate, at least in the current way that you guys understand it. Okay. Um, I'm not addressing any of their arguments. They can speak for themselves. I am personally not an anarchist. I do have, some sympathies toward the anarchist view. And perhaps I wouldn't even argue if some of them criticized me and said, well, you're not being consistent. I might concede. but I am not one. Okay, they're basically like, hey, there are no rulers. However, that doesn't mean there are no rules. That's a fun saying that they like to have. And no, hey, not it's not no rules, just no rulers. And again, they have a vision of how society would be best built. They can defend that. They can defend any positions that they have regarding the civil unrest, because from what I've seen, there's going to be some broad differences. I've seen more of my anarchist peers doing a little bit more celebratory, um, commentary online than I see some of my libertarian peers. Then you've got your libertarians, and these are the folks. This is what I am. These are the folks that like limited government, right? We're the kind of people that say if government is currently the size of a beach ball, it should be shrunk down and have the authority and power that's equivalent to the size of a golf ball. Okay, that's kind of where I am. The primary purpose of government is to protect people and their property, and perhaps resolve disputes. Like those are the largest functions for libertarians that you're going to see. We might have some nuances and disagreements here and there, like, oh, well, they need to do this and they do that. But there's not going to be a whole lot more that doesn't fall into those kind of categories. Um, Basically, we look at it and we say, at best, government should set boundaries for everyone to work within, right? And then, of course, we'll have debate to the extent at which those boundaries exist, regulations, taxes, fines, and so forth, right? So, just to kind of get that out of the way, because in case I mention that word or in case you hear it, because I've seen that libertarian was trending for a while because that buffoon Stephen Miller, which we'll address that here in a minute. He's made several commentary posts on libertarians. The other thing that I think you should probably be aware of, again, my audience may already be familiar with this, but if you're new to the show or if you're not terribly familiar with libertarians, just kind of want to give you some foundations to work with. Okay. You have public property and you have private property. Now, are those the best terms to use? Not necessarily so. However, that will give you a good idea of what we're talking about when we use those terms. So if it's public property, it would be under the control or authority of some government. That means the local, state, or federal. Um, in my opinion, federal should have the least amount of property, probably virtually zero, then the state, which would have a little bit more. And again, we're talking about governments don't, in my mind, they don't actually own anything. You might better consider them as stewards or overseers or something along that line. But then you would have your state, which would have, you know, more public property than your federal government, and then your local, which I would say would have even more. And I mean proportionate to the size of their scope, not necessarily in in uh, in square miles or footage or whatever, right? So I'm talking about like national parks. They should at best be state parks, right? We shouldn't have national parks. That's not, to me, that's not the that's not the federal government's role. When we talk about private property, we are talking about businesses, homes, etc., that are owned either by an individual or maybe a group of individuals. So like this house that I live in is owned by my wife and I. We collectively own this together. Both of our names are on the deed or on the, on all the relevant legal paperwork. Okay, so we own this together. It's our property. But then there are some people who maybe they're single and they own property, right? So it would just be one person. So when we say private property, that's what we're talking about, and that extends to businesses, that extends to vehicles, anything that you have. Now you may hear the commies out there try to distinguish between private and personal property. That's for a different conversation somewhere else. In the libertarian world, there is private property. That is it. It's property owned by a personal individual or group of individuals coming together. All right. So where do we want to start with this? Now that we've got some of that out of the way, let's start with the previous libertarian candidate, Chase Oliver. He started up the other day. Here's what he posted. Oh, let me turn that music off for just a second. We don't want that just yet. All right. So Chase Oliver tweeted out, California, this should be the national mood. Keep it up. And then he was retweeting A comment from social, Blue Sky Social, I think, where somebody named Anonymous said ICE forced to barricade themselves inside the federal building in Los Angeles until LAPD could intervene and rescue them from the brave crowds standing up to the regime. All right. And then here's a picture, and we can see that ICE is kind of backed into a corner here. They're at a federal building and they're being pushed back. Okay. So that comment from him stirred things up. He got like 3,000 comments, some 900 reposts and quotes, almost 3,000 likes, 2.4 million views. Let's just say that it went pretty viral. So then what we had happen is Stephen Miller from the Trump administration, he came out and he said this was the Libertarian candidate for president. Like, as if this is a bad thing, right? So, let's see some of the comments. I believe this is now where we want to get into some of the comments. Yeah. Yes, here's some of the comments. Oh, we need our clown music back. All right. So, some of the comments responding in some way to Stephen. The redheaded libertarian, we got more coming from her. I was at the LNC. The second and third place libertarian candidates gamed the system and pulled their delegates to get the nomination in the dead of night after the convention ran over and 1/3 of the delegates had to leave to catch flights. The majority didn't want this. Well, the majority should have stayed. They should have planned better. By the way, that following Monday was Memorial Day. So you might, if you look it up, you'll find out that some 90% of all Americans have that day off. So there was no reason to, this is the LNC has their annual convention once every 2 years. We already have an idea of where the 2026 convention is going to be. And we've known that for like a year or longer. Okay. So there's no reason that you can't plan accordingly. So no excuses. What else do we get? Left libertarians know full well that mass migration is a tool to maintain Democrats' dominance in U.S. politics. Dominance, huh? Like the presidency, the House, the Senate, for which they are not dominant. I'm just saying. I mean, they can't even figure out, why is my music not playing? What is up with that? Let's loop that. Hold on. There we go. But like even think about their party, the DNC, the National Party. Like they can't even figure out who they want to run it. They brought on David Hogg as their vice chair, and then they're like, we didn't quite follow the rules, and we had too many guys, too many men, get in that position at the expense of minorities. I don't know that they're dominant on anything. Maybe here locally, here and there, where you have, strong populations of Democrat voters. Okay, well, that makes sense that they're going to be kind of dominant there. You've got the majority group, in some cases, significantly, but you also have that for Republicans. They support it anyway because they overwhelmingly prefer to be ruled by Democrats than Republicans. Well, sir, I prefer not to be ruled by anybody. That's another comment. That's a comment for another day. All right, let's see what we got. I repeat, libertarians are reverse communist. Not really sure how you got that out of any of this, but sure. How's that meme go? Sure, Jan. Let's see what else we got. Libertarians need to go into the dustbin of history. Well, lucky for you, they keep fighting each other and kind of already putting themselves there. Let's see. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Libertarians are mentally ill Republicans. Is that the case? All right. Libertarians are too stupid sometimes. I cannot stand their dumb point of view on some issues. So self-destructive. We're going to find out. We're going to look into some of this stuff. Horrifying. I left the Libertarian Party to vote for Trump years ago. Good move. As you might have noticed there, Google board girl, we haven't missed you. Let's see. Marshall says there has not been a Libertarian candidate since Ron Paul. These other morons are frauds. I don't really get into this whole, are they a real libertarian or are they not? Just basically and that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to talk about libertarian ideas that I can defend and how I can present them to you and say, this qualifies as a libertarian idea or this does not. And I don't really worry too much about people. Now, if somebody happens to have an overwhelming number of positions that are not defensible uh, under the libertarian position, well, then perhaps that's the shoe that they're wearing, right? Let's see. Libertarians don't count anymore. Did we ever? I mean, come on, let's be honest. The two parties have had a stronghold for quite some time. And they use every bit of everything they've got to make sure that we don't break through. Let's see. What a joke the libtardians are. Okay. I'll give you a few points for the clever terminology. It's dumb, but it's still kind of clever. You know, putting words together. It's like, you know, libtardians. Okay, sure. We'll go with that. I guess my soft spot for libertarianism has been cured. Oh, okay. Based on one person that may or may not even be correct, which we'll get into. Let's see. Oh, I like this one. Libertarians are gay and are astonishingly inseparable from the left on retard points. That's very interesting. You know why? Because like a few screenshots back, there was somebody that was like, "Yeah, they're mentally ill Republicans." So it's like they're bad Republicans, they're bad leftists. There's like I'm not sure that people understand exactly how to classify us. Now, I will say this: I brought that comment up one for the humor of responses, but also I noticed that a lot of libertarians were like practically tripping over themselves to denounce Chase for saying that, right? And you know, like the redhead at the very beginning who was all like, "Well, you know, we didn't vote, we didn't want this. That's not what we wanted," and all these things have. Basically, those are all excuses. I've identified that elsewhere. We can have that conversation again some other day, but that's all excuses. You lost fair and square. End of story. Like, put it this way: if you think that Chase Oliver was an awful, terrible libertarian and dumb and all these other names that you called him, what are you that you couldn't even beat him within the libertarian ranks? Okay. Now let me show you so there was another libertarian who was vying for the nomination at the same time that Chase was. And these two were largely considered, for the most part, to be the front runners. Okay. His name was Michael Rechtenwald. So let me show you a post that he made. He says, I will cut 100% from the DOJ, ATF, FBI, and EPA. And that's just me getting started. He posted this in March of 2024. Then, in follow up to that comment, he was asked, let's see here. There we go. Let's get this. He was asked, what about ICE? And he said, abolish ICE, DHS, and cast the entire Patriot Act into the dustbin of history. That's pretty interesting. So Chase Oliver, the guy who won but wasn't supposed to win because of all the cheaters who beat the people that were just good, upstanding people who clearly didn't know any better and had 2 years to plan but didn't, right? Chase Oliver, he comments criticism on ICE, and then libertarians rush to denounce him or to pretend like he wasn't really the guy that was supposed to represent us or all these other things. Yet, meanwhile, many of those people supported a guy who didn't even want ICE to be here. Like he literally said, send ICE into the dustbin of history. So if he had won and he had ran, if he had ran and won, if he had won the nomination and then went on to win the election by some crazy miracle, and then he was like, all right, let's start shutting down these. Okay, how would that be any different? You wouldn't have an ICE to go out to these countries, these states to say, hey, we're going to round up people and do mass deportations. So how is it, libertarians, party of principle, that you were able to support a guy that wanted to abolish ICE and you had no problems with that, but then you somehow have problems with a guy who's being very critical of ICE, who also wanted to abolish ICE, by the way. So I'm just saying, if you want to be the party of principle, start with having them. How about that? Now, it is difficult to put libertarians into a box. I want you to think of it as a spectrum. That's an inside joke if you get it. But seriously, there are some people who support mass deportations, and there are others who oppose it. There are some who support ICE arresting and deporting illegal immigrants, whether it's en masse or not. And then there are others who oppose it. There are some who advocate for a closed border. There are others who advocate for an open border. And yet there are others who believe in a more Ellis Island style immigration. That's basically limiting entrance to only those who are not violent criminals and do not have a contagious disease, right? That's going to be your primary three categories for what do we do with the borders. So we're kind of all over the map in a sense. So instead of saying, here is the libertarian view, because as I just kind of pointed out, you can't really say that. I mean, some people like to, but what I want to do is I want to communicate to you, the audience. Let's talk about some of these ideas. Let's narrow this down. Let's talk about incidents and events, and let's pinpoint them and see where the conversation goes, rather than just kind of do this broad thing and go, this is the libertarian view, and then everybody can nitpick it. I will instead make these all severable. Okay. So you could address every single one of my arguments and say, well, okay, you got these points correct, but this point you got wrong. Right. And then we don't have to worry about, is this the libertarian position? Right. So we're just going to talk. So if you got a complaint, direct it at a specific thing, because I am not making an argument that this is the libertarian position. I think it's the proper one. I think it's the correct one. But I also recognize that others have different views and they have different arguments. So I will fall back on what I call my three pillars of libertarianism to determine what actions can be supported and which ones should be considered a violation. If you remember, that's self-ownership, the non-aggression principle, and freedom of association. I already talked about these in different episodes in the past. So if you want to learn about my thoughts on self-ownership, go to episode 447. If you want to hear about the non-aggression principle, you can go to episode 448 and then 449 for freedom of association. To make it quick and simple here, self-ownership, that's in my mind the foundation, which is the unequivocal right of ownership of your own body. That means I can choose to use it however I want. I can go out in the yard and I can make a garden. And because I made that garden and I toil in it and I fought off all the animals and the bugs, right? I get to have the fruits of that labor. And so that stuff is mine to do with. It's basically, in a sense, an extension of my body because it came from the labor which came from my body. This is how we understand private property rights. This would also apply to me working for a company, getting paid, and then going and, say, buying a car, a house, an Xbox, or what have you. So that's self-ownership. Then we have the non-aggression principle. Because you own yourself, that means you have the freedom, the right to be free from the initiation of physical force. Aggression is defined as the initiation of physical force against persons or property, the threat of such, or fraud upon persons or their property. Fraud, of course, being like the simplest way to understand that is if I go out and I'm a single guy, if I go out and I meet with a lady, I meet a lady at the bar, and I make up all kind of lies and I tell her all these kind of things to sweep her off her feet and get her into bed. And then she finds out the next day that all of it was a lie and that she only agreed because she thought, wow, I've scored. I've found this great, awesome guy. Now, you could argue she should, we're not going to get it too deep into the argument, but I'm just trying to illustrate the point here. Like, I defrauded her in this story by presenting myself as something that was not true, which changed the decision that she was willing to make. This would be, you could also look at it like if I sell you a car and you ask me and you say, hey, are all the major components functional? And if I know that there's a problem with the transmission that prevents the car from going faster than 20 miles an hour, and I don't disclose that, particularly after you've asked it, then I've created fraud because that will change the nature of the transaction that we make. You might no longer be willing to purchase that car. You might say, hey, I want to purchase this car, but now that I know this, for a reduced price, right? That's how fraud works. That's why it gets considered under the non-aggression principle, because it has the same effect as forcing somebody to do something that they may not want to do. And then you have freedom of association. That's the right to decide who you will associate with and under what terms. So this is the same as I could invite anybody over. I could invite a bunch of white people to my house and say, I want white people to come to my house and no black people. Or I could say, I want black people to come to my house and no whites. Right? I can do that. We also extend that to business. Now, that may not be the law, but that's where we stand. We say, look, you have the right to associate with anybody and under what terms. And it goes from the flip side. I could choose to do business and say, I will only do business with black owned companies. Or I could say, I will only do business with white owned companies. Right. And right now, that's totally legal, totally legal. And yet, society does not break down. So just kind of walking you through these. So I have a couple of videos that I want to show. I actually have quite a few videos, but I broke them up um, to make this to make this episode. So the first one, it comes from an influencer who is out in California. I don't know if he lives there or just traveled there, but he's an influencer. His name is Kaizan, I think. I think it's Kaizan D something. I can't pronounce his last name. But he went out to the protest, and from what I've seen of him, he tends to be pretty objective. And so I thought, okay, his video I thought had some value. So we're going to watch that. And then I'm going to show you a bunch of different clips that I've cut up from the big weekend show on Fox News. Now, I will blur those videos to keep me from getting in trouble with YouTube. But I don't believe that I have to do that with Kaizan's video. So before we, I want to show the Kaizan video before we get into the nitty gritty, so that we're not too consumed with the worst parts of what's happening in LA, because that's what the news tends to focus on, right? It's like, oh, if it bleeds, it leads. You remember those sayings from back in the day? Because I do. And that tends to be what happens. All the worst things bubble up to the top, and then we watch video after video after video, and then before you know it, we're like, "Oh my god, it's a war zone in California," when it may actually only be limited to a particular few areas. So, let's play this first video clip, and we will see what Kaizan has to say about this.
I'm here in downtown LA in front of Los Angeles City Hall because there's a protest going on against the ICE raids that happened here on Friday. And I came to just check it out because sometimes it's so hard to know what's true when you're in the echo chambers in social media and mainstream media. It's getting all these narratives, and I just wanted to come down here and see for myself what was going on, what people are saying, what they're feeling. While I was here, someone handed me this literal communist newspaper, and it was interesting to note that the most common flag was a Mexican flag, as one would expect. Second most common flag, and it was actually pretty close, was the Palestinian flag. And then there were a few American flags in there as well. And when I asked some of the people with the American flags, why did they have American flags? They said it was because they wanted to make sure that the bad guys don't get to hold the American flag as their symbol. So just a little bit of insight into the mind of these people who are protesting. And it was largely peaceful. Now there are sirens going off, so I'm not really sure what's happening right now. But I do have some thoughts. I did make a video at the protest that I'm going to share with you guys tomorrow. But until then, here are some sights and scenes from the protest. Stay safe and enjoy.
All right, so this is the relevant part that I wanted you to see. Just watch it and tell me what you notice. Notice anything? Anything missing? Anything you might not be seeing? Turn the volume down on that a wee bit here. Now, these are different video clips that he's made. Kind of interesting. Where's all the rioting? Where's all the burning? It's not there. That's weird. All right. So that's enough. I just wanted to kind of give you a glimpse. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to point out, number one, before we get into because stuff like what you just saw, most people aren't really arguing about that. However, we do need to keep in mind that it exists. So when we're talking about sending in federal forces and, oh my God, we got to do all these things, we need to remember There are different things happening. California is a big state. LA is fairly sizable. There are different things happening in different places. We have had here in Jacksonville, we have had incidents where there's been violence that broke out and it was contained into a small area where other areas were having similar protests. This was during the BLM movement, and we didn't have anything going on, right? Like just outside of the normal, people standing there with their signs, protesting, saying whatever they want. Now, here in America, you have the First Amendment, okay? And the First Amendment is extremely broad on purpose. And it's been reiterated through the courts over many years to be broad and to grant the maximum amount of speech possible. For some, maybe even too much. Okay. Now, I will say this when it comes to the flags, that's very interesting because it's really not a good look. But it is part of freedom of speech. I could go outside right now and just walk around my neighborhood holding any flag from any country. I could just walk around and nobody could do anything about it. Right. I mean, my neighbors could yell at me and they could say mean things to me, and that's their freedom of speech. I don't think they would, but they could. And they could take pictures of me. They could live stream it. Also, freedom of speech, right? I'm out in public doing this. So, therefore, this is just illustrating the amount of free speech that we actually have. But I want to show you something because a lot of people have been making these comments and they're like, oh, oh, you know, they've got a Mexican flag. It's an invasion. I see. If that's an invasion, because you've got people that want something from Americans and they're using the Mexican flag. What do we call this? And for those that are listening in Spotify and iTunes, um, this is a screenshot of multiple pictures of people in our government holding Israeli flags. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Then we also have this picture over here. So this is Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris with President Zelensky in Congress, and our two representatives or former representatives, um, they were holding up a Ukraine flag in Congress, right? And then you have, let's see, then we have this video over here. Let me show you this next video here real quick. Is it this one? This is this one here. This is also in Congress. Remember this? What do we got there? Can you see it? Let me pause it for a second. You notice anything? Those are Ukraine flags, little tiny handheld Ukraine flags being held, I think, largely by Democrats. I don't know that there was a single Republican that was holding one, but the Democrats were holding a flag in Congress of another country. So for me, I look and I reject this idea that just because you see a flag, it must be bad, right? That doesn't make it a good look. The court of public opinion operates entirely different than does the regular courts, right? The court of the legal courts. They operate differently. The court of public opinion, there aren't really rules per se that it has to abide by. And people can get mad and they can say, we don't like this. We're not voting for you. We're not shopping at your store. We're not doing all kinds of things because you have a flag, you don't have a flag, you stepped on a flag, you have two flags, your flag is too big. Any number of reasons are fair game in the court of public opinion. But I just want to point out, if you're the kind of person that's like, hey, we need to deport these people, and then you support either Ukraine or Israeli flags being held, even in our government bodies or by our government officials, perhaps you check yourself. Now, if you're the kind of person that says, like, look, outside of the American flag, they shouldn't be having any, great, you're consistent. But that's not an awful lot of people. So we want to make sure that we try to be consistent. And that's part of being a libertarian, is evaluating things objectively and saying, all right, what is the consistent take? And the consistent take is not, it may be presented this way, but it is not about I have principles and I'm right because all of my principles align. That's not what it's about. Some make it that way. But what it's really about is, are we protecting the rights of the individual? And the more consistent you are, the more likely you are protecting the rights of the individual. That's why I'm presenting this to you. Also, I want to point out that in America, peaceful protest should always be supported, even by immigrants, legal or otherwise. Because at the end of the day, free speech is for everyone. The right to defend yourself is for everyone. Put it this way: if you don't believe that an immigrant who is here either legally or illegally should be permitted to carry around a Mexican flag or a flag of their home country, wherever that's from, if you don't believe that they should be, then you're saying you don't believe in their First Amendment right. And if you say, well, they don't agree with the First Amendment right, let me take you on a short journey to the next amendment, the Second Amendment, which gives you the right to self-defense. If an immigrant does not have the right to free speech and they can be punished, then that also would mean, logically speaking, they don't have the right to self-defense, which means you should be able to go and harm them at any time without punishment from the government. I dare say most people would not make that argument, nor should they, because it's an incorrect argument. The Bill of Rights should be always considered applicable to individuals. That doesn't mean that there aren't other rules that we can impose and that people should abide by. As I've said before, I'm an Ellis Island kind of person. So for me, I look at it and I say, we should open up the borders and allow people to come in, and we should simply check to see if they have a violent criminal history. And if they don't have a violent criminal history, then we should allow them in. If they don't have a communicable disease, we should allow them in. Now, I have made the kind of like I've carved out the exception and said, well, if they're working with like say a Mayo Clinic or one of those kind of entities, and that entity has said, hey, this person has a remarkable case, we're going to take care of them. We will make sure that this communicable disease doesn't get spread out. Then that's fine. I have no issue with them taking that on. Why? Because at the end of the day, when I look at my libertarian values, what I am trying to do is build a society that I appreciate, that I want to live in. That's ultimately the goal. I don't care about necessarily whether it's 100% principled, whether all my arguments line up, whether it's philosophically correct per se. I think that my goal and your goal should be, what kind of society do we want to live in? And then kind of drive toward that. And that's part of a longer conversation. Ultimately, it boils down to, I don't believe that we can ever hit perfection. And so because of that, I'm aiming for something just shy of perfection. So, and I keep going. Like I make the point regularly that even though I want smaller government, there is no end point where I say, this is the smallest government that I would be willing to accept. Once we get to my golf ball size, we can look and say, is there more that we can remove? Is there more that we should remove? And if by perchance we got down to where we said, I guess the next move is an anarchist society, then perhaps that's where we go. So the anarchist society for me is not off the table. However, that is not necessarily my goal. My goal when I preach liberty, when I preach libertarian values, is to create a society that I believe is one that would be wonderful to live in, one that respects the rights of the individuals. Okay. That's why I use the three pillars that I use, not the self-ownership, non-aggression, and freedom of association, because I believe that with all three of those, I can basically hit upon pretty much any topic that we need to, which I will do my best to demonstrate today. Now, before I do that, because we're getting ready to get into the nitty gritty stuff, and this is where I'm going to pull up this Fox News clip, and we're going to talk about a lot of things here in just a moment. Before I do that, let me kind of scroll through the comments a little bit, and then as I'm doing that, I will, just take some comments, address them really quickly. I will be brief today because I do have a hard stop. And so I have to be mindful of my time today, particularly. So I apologize. I will do my best to get to everyone that I can. All right. So let's see what we got in here in the comments. Oh, we got fun. We got some fun comments I see here. We got a bunch. You guys are chatty today. So let's see. Keith says, maybe I'm an anarchist. Perhaps. You better be careful. They're looking to grow their numbers. I'm just saying. He also says public property is bad. In general, I agree. If we narrow it down to, like, say, a public park that is overseen and ran by your local government, I'm less concerned with that. If you're talking about, large swaths of land that the federal government controls, not so cool with that. So a lot of it depends. And I also understand, like, the Supreme Court. Like, if you're going to have a Supreme Court, they kind of need a building, and that kind of needs to have some special rules, right, around the Supreme Court, its function, what it's supposed to do, all those good things. So in that particular case, I would say, yeah, the federal government can have a big enough area to conduct Supreme Court rulings and not rulings, but Supreme Court cases. So let's see here. Time Surfing Alien says, need to start shutting down these ABC agencies. Oh, we're going to get to some more of that, I think. But yes, I agree. If it's a 3-letter agency, or if there's more letters in any of them, we should abolish them. Almost a guarantee. I can't think off the top of my head of any agency that I would not shut down at the federal level. Because I believe that the federal level is not supposed to be utilized for certain things. For me, I look at it and I say the federal government should be, in theory, the smallest of them all, but it should have some of the greater responsibility, basically protecting the country as a whole from foreign invasions. So if Canada were to raise up a crazy army and come at us, that's when the federal government would round up their troops and say, all right, you want to go? We're going to go. Right? That's how I see it. Now, others might make the argument and say, well, you could just do that by the state level and they could join forces. That's a conversation for another day. All right, let's see what else we got in here. Let's see. No one likes us. That's true. And I think part of it is that we don't really communicate so well. So that's what I'm doing here today. I'm hopefully going to communicate some of these ideas in a way that makes it that helps people understand the libertarian position just a little bit better. Let's see. Definitely a spectrum. Somebody got that joke. All right, let's see what else we got in here. Is there a such thing as libertarian propaganda? Yes, Keith, there is. It's called the Liberty Dad Show. All right, what else we got here? Calamity Harris. DL almost said something. That's funny. And I've never heard that, but I like it. I'll have to try to remember that. Calamity Harris. That's awesome. All right, folks, let's go to a quick intermission. Then we're going to come back. We're going to get into the nitty gritty, and I'm probably going to make a lot of people angry, but it's okay. I'm used to doing that. That's what I do around here. So we'll be back. Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, so we're going to start with this first video. And again, these are all from the same video clip. And I'm trying to think of the name of the title of the show there. What was it again? It was the, where did it go? I had it right here. The Big Weekend Show on Fox News. They invited Tom Holman on. He's, answering some questions. So I thought, you know what? This would probably be a good way to address a lot of the elements of this. So hopefully this all makes sense. It did in my mind. So we will see. So let's start with this first video here. And like I said, I'm going to have a blur on this just so I don't get in trouble with Fox News on YouTube. So here we go. Whoa.
You're looking at at live pictures out of Paramount, California, where protesters have been clashing with police all day outside a Home Depot. It is still unconfirmed whether immigration officials were conducting an ICE raid, but several ICE vehicles have sustained damages and multiple protesters have now been arrested for an assault on a federal agent.
Okay, let's start right here. Remember the distinction of anarchist versus libertarian? It's kind of useful here. Now, I've seen some anarchists out there online that are kind of gleeful about what they see happening. And again, they don't recognize the state as legitimate authority. And if I understand their position correctly, which I might not, they tend to look at this as more like a self-defense kind of a thing. I do not see it that way. Like I said, I'm sympathetic to anarchism, but I'm not one myself. So as a libertarian, I would argue the goal is to shrink government, again, from a beach ball to a golf ball. But that means that I still support some level of government, which would also include law and order. So when it comes to ICE vehicles sustaining damages, that's paid for by the citizens. That will have to be resolved, right? They have a vehicle, some terrorist, domestic terrorist burns it, right? And I'm comfortable calling him a terrorist in a sense. Maybe that's strong language, but when you're damaging property, when you're out randomly damaging property, when you're harming people, right? I don't see that as anything good. So if you damage public property, whether it's Supreme Courthouse or whether it's an ICE vehicle, at the end of the day, it's going to get fixed or replaced, which means what? That means more of my tax money goes toward that. So I have a problem with it. As far as I'm concerned, if you damage an ICE vehicle, you can be arrested because you're damaging property that you do not own. If you want to burn a car, in my opinion, it absolutely must be your car, or you should have explicit permission of the person or persons that own that vehicle. This applies to any other piece of property. This is why I say part of the self-ownership includes your property, things that come from your labor. You go to work, you work hard all day, you get a big fat paycheck, then you go buy something. That something came from you. Ultimately, that's the chain of events. If the money was taken from you against your will, taxation is theft, then what that means is your money now was not only stolen from you or taken, extorted, however you want to phrase it, right? But not only that, somebody came along and they gave reason now for money to be taken again for the same thing. So I have a problem with that because ultimately, when you burn an ICE car, I will have to pay for it. I don't want to pay for ICE cars. I don't want to pay for the first one. But here we are. So I have a problem with that. Assault on federal agents. When it comes to the non-aggression principle, as I understand it, as I apply it, is only for self-defense of yourself or other people. So you might, and that might include police, law enforcement officers. Now, somebody might be watching and go, whoa, 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 are you threatening? I am not. Let me explain. You might remember the 2020 case for Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor had a boyfriend. She had an old boyfriend. He was involved in some stuff. She left him. She got a new boyfriend. She's at her house. She's sleeping. Her new boyfriend's sitting in the living room or wherever. Police come. They kick in the door. He grabs his gun. He shoots, actually hits an officer. I think he shot him in the leg, right? Before he realized. Then he basically put his weapons down and surrendered. Okay? Breonna Taylor died. In that particular case, he was not exonerated. The charges were eventually dismissed. And he even got a settlement from the city because it was demonstrated in court that that the officers did not identify themselves. And so therefore, when they kicked in the door, he had reasonable belief that it was just an armed intruder. And so therefore could defend himself. So if you're defending yourself and you can make the case that you needed to defend yourself, potentially with lethal force, yes, that includes even federal agents. However, if a federal agent is coming and they have a warrant and they're like, you are under arrest, you do not get to shoot them. You do not get to throw Molotov cocktails at them. You do not get to throw rocks at them. That is violating their autonomy, right? Because again, if you're not in self-defense of a threat that you don't, like, number one, that you don't even know. Now, if an officer says, hey, we're going to arrest you, then in my opinion, being somebody that does accept some level of government, I say your fight is not with the officer on the street. Your fight is in court, because a judge can rebuke an officer. You cannot. I told this to a kid that I mentored a long time ago. He was telling me, he was like, yeah, he goes, I don't remember when it happened, but he was telling me that he had gotten pulled over by the police, and the police kind of were, a little rough there, like kind of grabbing his shoulder and whatever, and kind of forcibly sitting him on the concrete. And they thought he was somebody else. And so then they went and they looked up, he gave them the ID, his ID, they checked him out, and they realized, nope, this is not the guy we're looking for. So they said, you can go on your way, sir. And he said, if you do this again, I will file charges against you. Something like that. He kind of popped off. And I was like, dude, no, stop. I was like, shut up. Don't say anything. Right. This is what I told him after the fact. I said, you don't say anything. And he goes, I needed to get my respect. And I said, let me tell you something. Never in the history of policedom has an officer been confronted by a 17-year-old who told them that they needed to back down and that they were wrong. And the officer go, you know what, Mr. 17-year-old guy, you're right. I'm wrong. I apologize. I'm just going to go on my way now. Have a good day. Now, maybe it's happened, but when I say it's never happened, I mean, like, pretty much nobody can tell me, like, most people couldn't tell you a story. If anybody, I've never met anybody that could tell me a story where that has happened, because it's so atypical. We can consider it never happening. Right? You see what I mean? Like, we want to be careful with absolutes, but at the same time, it's so rare. People have heard about it so infrequently, like never, meaning we can kind of think about it as about as absolute as you can get. So again, you fight this fight in court. This is the way that our system of government was designed. Now, is it abusive? Yes, in a sense, right? Because if you think about it, if it's an officer grabs me up and says, I'm arresting you, and I'm like, dude, I didn't do it. And he's like, we're looking for a 6 foot tall dude. And I'm like, are you retarded? I'm 5'3", right? And the officer might say, I don't care. It's close enough, right? Like, I'm just kind of making up a story. Again, I could fight him and try to win, but what are the odds of that? He's got handcuffs, tasers, batons, guns, backup. He has a lot of things I don't have. More importantly, he has authority that is recognized by the rest of our government. So it's going to be very difficult if I were to fight back and punch him in the face and be like, dude, you're arresting the wrong guy, and I can prove it. And then I assault him, knock him out, whatever. And then I've got to try to make my case to the rest of my peers, in society. It's just not going to go well for me. So I look and I say, your fight at that point, that's why lawyers tell you, shut up. Your fight is in the court of law. So for me, if you're assaulting federal agents, you can be arrested, period. Now, if they surprise you and you immediately think that they're just a bad guy that you don't know and you don't realize it's a federal agent, that's a different story. Same as in the Kenneth Walker, Breonna Taylor case. Okay. But self-defense only. That's it. And I apply this consistently. If my neighbor comes over and starts yelling at me, I don't get to just start punching him in the face. But if he takes a swing at me, then yes, I can punch him in the face. Right? Do you see how this works? You have to be under threat in order to use aggression. That's how it works. All right. Now we could get into some more nuanced cases, but I just want to kind of lay it down in general. Right? I'm not trying to make this a 4-hour podcast and dive into every little nuance. We just kind of want to get some generalized ideas of what does a libertarian world look like with all of this going on? What is a proper libertarian response? All right, let's take a look at this next video here. So that's going to be clip number 4 here. And let me make sure that my filter is on and we're all good to go here. We just want to make sure we don't get in trouble with YouTube. They tend to come and get you. So here we are.
Free them all! Free them all! Free them all! Because an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us! And Los Angeles does not back down for that kind of fight!
Continue fighting until we reconstruct every single institution.
All right, I wanted to pause here. And where did my notes on that one go? Did I move? I think I might have lost some notes. I don't know. I might have lost some notes on that one. All right. So we'll just address what this woman said. She said, an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. Okay, you're protesting, you're speaking your voice. I kind of disagree, but it's freedom of speech. So I have no problem with it legally, right? I might disagree. I might criticize it and say, yeah, that, not really. It depends. If it's an attack on one of you and one of you has actually done something wrong, then number one, it's not really an attack on you. But let's say it is an attack on somebody and they haven't done anything wrong. It is still an individual. For the libertarian, we focus on the individual. It's a very rare case where I look and I say, this is a time where we talk about the group as a whole. That's not how I see rights. That's not how your typical libertarian is going to view rights. So for this woman, I don't think she's done anything wrong. I think she's well within her rights to say that, even if I disagree. Let's listen to this next guy.
And Los Angeles does not back down for that kind of fight.
Continue fighting until we reconstruct every single institution from the ground up.
Okay, so you can fight for that, and you can say we want to reconstruct all the institutions. However, you have no right to do that. When I say right, I mean, like, you can make the argument and I can listen and I can ignore you, or I can disagree with you and I can convince my fellow Americans, nah, we don't like that idea. Or if it's an appealing idea, I might say, yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let's do that. And then I can convince my fellow Americans. And then we can all get together and say, here, let's make these changes to our institutions. Now, when it comes to government institutions, first and foremost, I start with the Constitution. Does the Constitution permit it? If the Constitution does not permit it, well, then we're done talking. There's nothing to discuss, right? Now, if you want to add it to the Constitution, that's a different conversation, right? But we cannot just start changing things just because you like an idea. This is the value of what I'm trying to say today. We have a government. It's made up. It's organized in a specific way. It doesn't always function correctly. That's where libertarians come in, and hopefully we can whittle it down, because a smaller government is going to be more effective. It's going to be more useful. It's going to be less inconsistent. It's going to violate people's rights even less than what it does now. The bigger it is, the more right violations we can expect. Let's continue.
We can grant full amnesty for all immigrants.
Okay, so he wants full amnesty. That's a conversation we can have. And he's permitted to say this, but that doesn't mean that it has to happen, because citizens can look and say, do we want to give you amnesty? Now, in my opinion, I would argue and say, and we'll talk about this a little bit toward the end here, I would argue that amnesty for people who are not violent, right, that have not committed any violent crime, any property crime, or any fraud. In other words, their crime is they came over here without getting permission. That's an administrative crime, in my opinion. Or they came here legally, but then they overstayed their visa. Also an administrative crime. So I reject those as actual crimes. For me, a crime needs a victim. Government can never be a victim. Now, we were just talking, you might say, well, wait a minute, DL, you just said federal agents can't be assaulted. That's right, because they are people. People can be, people can have their rights violated. But the government is nothing more than a group of people that have gotten together and formalized laws and said, this is what we're going to enforce in society. That's all that is. All right, let's continue.
And full compensation for all of the victims of this criminal injustice system.
Okay, so I don't know what he means by compensation, but I'm going to tell you this. The only compensation that I, as a libertarian, will accept is if the government kicks in your door and then we find out that they went to the wrong house. Well, somebody owes you money for the repair of that door. Maybe they need to buy you a new door. Maybe they need to pay for it to be repaired. You should not be obligated if you did not commit a crime. Now, that's not what happens, but that's what should happen. So when we talk compensation, I'm looking for a direct victim of something that's quantifiable. Okay. Yeah. I think I talked the other day on one of my episodes about how some Japanese Americans were given compensation for being put into internment camps. And there was very specific criteria on who could get it. And part of that criteria was you had to be alive during that time. You had to be put into a concentration camp. And what would that do? That would mean that your employment and all these other things were disrupted. So basically, we could quantify loss to you from your time, right? We could also make the argument for somebody that's been locked up for 5 or 10 years. Hey, they got locked up for 5 or 10 years. And if we look back and it wasn't an honest mistake, if it was negligence, then somebody should pay for that. You could argue that even an honest mistake might get paid. But if he's just talking about just generic, this is a bad system and we need compensation, like almost in the same context that the Black community, some of them will say, well, we need reparations, then I will reject that. Plain and simple. So it's unclear exactly what he's talking about, but as far as I can tell, no.
Going to change this is organizing, and not just any type of organizing, militant organizing.
Okay, so now he's talking about militant organizing. I don't know what that means. Okay. If by militant, he just means being a nuisance, perhaps. It depends, right? If you're getting out and you're obstructing traffic, then I say, no, you can't do that. Why? Because you would be on public property, which is paid for by who? Everybody, effectively, right? It's paid for by tax money. Tax money comes from people that pay taxes. A lot of them. Give you an example. During the BLM riots, I was coming home from work. I was on my motorcycle. Just kidding. I was on my scooter. It's a big scooter, okay? Chill out. But anyway, I was on my scooter and I was coming home and I was getting ready to get onto a bridge, and I got to a point where when traffic stopped, I was stuck. There was no turning back and I couldn't go forward. Well, what happened was a bunch of BLM protesters got on the bridge and were obstructing traffic for everybody with their signs and everything. Every one of them should have been arrested. Why? Because as a taxpayer, I pay for the use of that road to travel across and back. Nobody is taking their money. Nobody, like, of the people that agree to pay taxes, and even of those who maybe didn't agree but had their taxes paid for, people aren't looking at that and saying the usage of this is for people to stand up and obstruct traffic so they can get a point across. No, we all agree, hey, this is for traveling back and forth. There's no sidewalks, so you can't walk on it. You're supposed to ride on it with a motorcycle or a motorized vehicle, or drive your car on it. And if you're not doing that, then you're not giving it the intended usage. The same would apply for, like, say, a public park, which I've argued in the past. We should look at it and say, what are you doing there? Is it the general understanding of what this property is supposed to be used for when we're talking about public property? If it is not the standard usage, then the answer is you probably cannot do it. Okay? Especially if you're inhibiting others with their right to be able to use it. So when he says militant, it depends on what he means. If he just means they're going to be loud and angry and say strong language and, maybe boycott things and, cause financial disruption, fine. I have no problem with that. If that means they're going to carry around firearms just in case, maybe look a little intimidating, but they're otherwise not threatening people directly, then fine. I have no issue with that either. So a lot of it depends on what he means by militant. But I'm guessing that I wouldn't agree with him. Just a hunch that I have. Okay, so let's move on. I don't know why I lost all my commentary on that one, but that's okay. So let's take a look at this next video. We're just going to go right on down the line here. And let me make sure I got my proper filter on here. So all right, so we will play this video.
Mayor Karen Bass is still standing with the protesters, saying she's fighting for all Angelenos regardless of immigration status, and doubling down that LA is a city of migrants, leaving out the illegal part. But the people on the side, as Karen Bass, are threatening ICE agents, spray painting death to ICE on dumpsters. Gavin Newsom also weighing in on the riots and blamed them on, get this, President Trump, accusing him of tearing families apart.
Okay, so in addition to that, Mayor Karen Bass She pointed out, let me see, there he goes. She pointed this out. She said, this morning we received reports of federal immigration enforcement actions in multiple locations in Los Angeles. As mayor of a proud city of immigrants who contribute to our city in so many ways, I am deeply angered by what has taken place. These tactics sow terror in our communities and disrupt basic principles of safety in our city. My office is in close coordination with immigrant rights community organizations. We will not stand for this. Okay. And then she went on and she had this to say on social media. She said, we will always protect the constitutional right for Angelenos to peacefully protest. However, violence, destruction, and vandalism will not be tolerated in our city, and those responsible will be held fully accountable. Okay, fair enough. I agree with that. If you are engaging in violence or destruction or vandalism, you are wrong. Now, if you want to make charged language and say death to ICE, I don't have an issue, right? Because you're not technically calling for, you're not saying you go out and do this action. You're just saying, hey, I hope you die. Is it unsavory language? Yes, it is. Is it best to use that language? No, it's not. Do I consider it to be protected free speech? Yes, I do. Right. And I'm very consistent. Okay. It doesn't matter whether you say, hey, I can't wait till Joe Biden dies or I can't wait till Trump dies. I hope they both die. You can say that. Right. Now, that is legally, you should not be punished for saying those things. Now, publicly, in the court of public opinion, you might be. Right. Because again, like I said, it operates on an entirely different set of rules. So both Newsom and Bass should do more than just talk about handling violence, because I've seen way too many videos and it doesn't seem like they're handling that violence, and they need to. But I will say this, Newsom, man, I hate saying this. Okay, let me kind of stretch a little bit here. Okay, I'm going to say this. I can do it. Newsom has a point. You know what? I hate you, federal government, for making me say that. I really do. All right, the rhetoric leading up to this election. Remember Lake and Riley, say her name, Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment complexes, MS-13, all this language about violent immigrants, right? That language led up to where we are because it led people to believe that there was something happening at a certain level. Now, there's no dispute that it's happening. It's the level at which it's happening. That's what is under dispute. Okay. And then we were also told that millions, it depends on who you talk to. It could it's usually what I see is somewhere between 10 and 20 million. 10 and 20 million people were allegedly brought here intentionally or assisted intentionally by the Biden administration. However, oddly enough, the most high profile stories are those of people that have been here prior to the Biden administration. So it's kind of weird, right? Like, if you look back and you're like, well, we were told all this stuff. There's MS-13, there's Venezuelan gangs, they're doing all this crazy stuff. They're killing our young girls and, some of our guys too, and, moms and dads, and they're selling all these drugs. And yet the high profile cases that we tend to get are people that have been here for like 10 years. So it's kind of weird. In fact, even Abrego Garcia, the infamous Maryland man, the one that was man that was brought back from El Salvador, despite the government saying it was totally not possible, we can't do it. Well, he's going to be charged with a slew of crimes, none of which were presented when the story first broke. Man, why are my notes all out of order here? That's kind of weird. I think I moved some things around, and that's what happened. So let me see here. Let's see if I could find where I think that's okay. We'll figure it out. That's all right. I might have moved some things around and got my stuff disorganized. That's okay. All right. So we're talking about Abrego Garcia, and let me pull up some images here. Let's see here. I hate when things are not. I thought I had it all right, and then bam, I don't. All right. So let's see what we got here. Let's see. Okay. Did I want to go that far, or is that for later? Let me take a look. Yeah, I think. Yeah, we're gonna go right now. All right. So here we go. Homeland Department of Homeland Security. Now, Abrego Garcia, he was deported March 15th. Okay. This post here from Homeland Security, this was on April 14th. It was a little bit too big, too lengthy for me to get to capture the date, but you could go look it up. Then you have this one here. So let me go back. I'm sorry. Whether Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a confirmed MS-13 terrorist, is in El Salvador or a detention facility in the U.S., he should be locked up and off American streets, right? POTUS, Trump, and Secretary Noem are fighting for the victims of alien crime and putting the safety of American first. Okay, so they don't actually identify any particular crimes at this time. Now, mind you, this is a month after he was deported, after people started going, wait a minute, what happened here? Okay, so then we look and we see that then on the 15th, the next day, Homeland Security, they tweet out, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is not a Maryland man. He's an MS-13 gang member involved in human trafficking. Okay, so now this is the first time we're talking about human trafficking, who entered the United States illegally. His deportation to El Salvador was always going to be the end result. Okay, fair enough. It might have been the end result based on, an investigation of his situation and what evidence came out of that. That might have always been the end result. But our government, if we're going to talk and have a conversation and say, hey, people should respect the rule of law, our government should especially respect the rule of law. They should not be deporting people and then later backtracking and saying, okay, well, here's this information, information that wasn't present or available or even mentioned when they punished somebody. That's what people got angry about, right? Then we got this other one here. So this is, I believe this one was the next day. It might have been the same day. I think it was the 16th. Abrego Garcia had a history of violence and was not the upstanding Maryland man the media has portrayed him. According to court filings, Garcia's wife sought a domestic violence restraining order against him, claiming he punched, scratched, and ripped off her shirt, among other harm. This MS-13 gang member is not a sympathetic figure. Okay. Then we go on and we see that on April 16th, they say Homeland Security, they lay out Abrego Garcia was illegally in the U.S. and had a lawful deportation order. That is correct. Garcia was arrested and found with rolls of cash and drugs. Okay, that's true. I don't know, libertarians oppose drug laws. We oppose the drug war. It's been a massive failure. So for me, having lots of money and having drugs, that's not an issue. Okay, it is technically now with drugs, but having a lot of cash, while it might be indicative of something, it's not a crime. Then we go on and we see, all right, the next day, 2 days later, April 18th, Abrego Garcia, gang member, illegal alien from El Salvador and suspected human trafficker. The facts reveal he was pulled over with 8 individuals in a car traveling from Texas to Maryland with no luggage. The media's sympathetic narrative about the criminal illegal gang member has completely fallen apart. What's interesting is that the government did not lay this out the moment people started complaining and saying, whoa, wait a minute here. I think you have abused the law, right? And then the government say, okay, well, I understand how you can see it that way. Here is all the information that we have. Here's all the evidence that we have against him. This is why you should not object. That should have been right up front. If he was deported on March 15th, by March 16th, maybe March 17th, the government should have been like, here's all the information that you need to dissuade, to assuage your concerns about us doing things improperly. Because again, for a libertarian, 2 entities should be following the law. Citizens, but more importantly, government. All right, so we move on here. And Will Chamberlain, he's definitely a cheerleader for the administration. He says on the, this was on the 18th, it did not capture his date, but he says, okay, at this point, I'm happy to give a huge congrats to so-and-so and the Tennessee Star for breaking the story of Abrego Garcia being a likely human trafficker. Credit to so-and-so for nailing down key confirmation from DHS. And so then he retweets Tennessee Star, and their post that they broke on the 17th said the Tennessee Highway Patrol contacted the Tennessee Star on Thursday night to confirm its earlier reporting that Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the citizen of El Salvador, who was deported last month by the Trump administration, was stopped by THP in 2022. So that information was not presented. Then they go on and they give some more details. So effectively, okay, DL, what is it that you're saying here? Well, what I'm trying to tell you is that yes, we have laws that need to be maintained. Yes, I understand this, right? However, the government also has to present this information to the public so that we understand, okay, when you're doing something, do you have the authority to do it or not? So when we go back to this idea of ICE and what they should be doing, they should be, in my mind, as a libertarian, as somebody who would say, number one, we should abolish ICE. But if we're not abolishing ICE, then what do they do? Where does that put them? Then what I would say is what that does is that puts them in, they should only be making an arrest when they have a warrant or in response to violence when executing that warrant. So let's look at another video here real quick. And hopefully I'm not getting too out of organized here. I think we're doing all right.
Look, we're going to continue doing our job. And yesterday we got 118 arrests. I was out here yesterday to kick off this operation. And what people aren't talking about is I served, several warrants yesterday. These were criminal warrants. This is
okay. So if ICE served a warrant, presumably that warrant is backed by evidence. This person did this thing. It's a crime. Now, again, I look at crimes and I say, I want a victim. So if you don't have a victim, if the victim is the government, it's not a crime. Okay. I don't see it that way. But presumably they had, hey, this person trafficked this person. This person violently did this thing to this other person. We have evidence. All right, great. Go get them. Okay. That's the responsibility. And that's what I would support. Let's continue listening.
Criminal investigation. And today we're continuing operations. They're not going to shut us down. We're out there right now doing operations. We're going to keep doing operations. We brought in more resources to push back the protesters, but I'll say it again, a serious warning. You can protest all you want. You got your First Amendment rights. But if you cross that line of impediment, or you're putting hands on officers or destroy property, you will be prosecuted. There's zero tolerance on crossing that line.
Okay, I agree. If you damage property, if you put your hands on somebody, you should be punished.
And that's what we're standing by. We're bringing more resources as we speak. We'll have more resources tonight. We're going to continue doing the job that American people voted Donald Trump in office to do. And we're not going to apologize for doing it.
Okay. Now that pulls up a very interesting point, and I'm going to have to make sure that I keep an eye on the time. Hopefully we won't run out of time here and I won't have to come back. But I want to address that last part that he said. We're going to continue doing the job that the American people voted Donald Trump into office to do. This is the so-called mandate, right? I've noticed that a lot of people who previously supported secession, states' rights, or what you might properly consider autonomy, and limited federal government, they seem to be quite happy having Trump send ICE to California. In fact, here's what one person pointed out. Let me put this up on the screen here. Not there. Let's go here and let's back up here a little bit. Let me get to this. I think I got some things out of order. That's okay. We will get to them here. So, all right. So here is what I told you earlier that I was going to come after the redhead. Well, here I am. When you are letting your state burn yet again and continue to betray your oath to the Constitution, the president can call up the militia to do the job you refuse to do and put down this insurrection. Article 2, Section 2. Then she went on later and said, sanctuary cities are unconstitutional under Articles 1 and 6. The federal government's only job is to enforce the Constitution. Fascism is more like when a governor and mayor betray the oath he took to the Constitution while their cities burn. Okay, sounds pretty convincing, right? It sounds like, but there's some misinformation. So, Article 2, Section 2. It provides constitutional authority for the president as commander-in-chief to use the militia, but it actually says nothing about an insurrection, right? It's not in there. It doesn't talk about what, here's an insurrection, here's how it's defined. None of that. Okay. That's why Congress passed the Insurrection Act of 1807, right? The Posse Comitatus Act forbids U.S. military, federal armed forces, and the National Guard to be used for civilian law enforcement. The Insurrection Act gives president significant power to deploy federal forces within the U.S., right? And then you're going to look at specifics. You're going to say, all right, Section 251 of the act allows the use of the militia or armed forces upon a state legislator or governor's request to suppress insurrection. Okay, that's after it has started, not before. And that requires the permission. So the governor or the legislative body might say, hey, we need some help here. We're trying to put this down, but we're overwhelmed. Please send backup. That's how that works. Section 252 permits deployment when unlawful obstructions to federal law occur and the state cannot or will not protect federal authority. So in this case, you can think of this like deploying troops to desegregate schools post Brown versus Board of Education. That would be an example of when Section 252 was implemented or invoked. Then you have Section 253. And by the way, this was after the Brown versus Board of Education had made a ruling. And then they said, all right, who is it? I think her name was Ruby Bridges, the little black girl. And she was escorted into school by the military, right? This was because the state and the local authorities were refusing. And in this particular case, you could also say that Section 253 applied as well, because that authorizes intervention to enforce the equal protection of laws when a state is unable or fails to do so. Right. So there are criteria under which this can happen. Now, Section 253 was more specifically toward protecting people, whereas 252 was saying, all right, the government has said that this is the law of the land. It's not being enforced. And so therefore, we're going to enforce it. Right. This is why they sent troops to escort a young girl to go to school. 253, that was added after the Civil War to address KKK attacking Black folk, where states and local communities we're not protecting them. So again, after some sort of action. So in other words, this idea that the government can just come in and say, we're going to make some arrests, and then, now you're pushing back. Well, we just got to invoke all this authority. It's not really so true. The redhead doesn't make this clear, so I figured I would. The verdict is, when you look at if you consider the timeline of events, I would argue that the Insurrection Act in this particular moment is kind of out of order, right? Because you had ICE coming in to make arrest, and they had some warrants, so fine, no issue there. The state and local governments, they have no legal obligation to assist, right? And that's been codified into law, various court rulings, right? Immigrants, legal and illegal, along with citizens, presumably, who are in defiance, some are damaging property and assaulting federal LEOs. For those people, local authorities should arrest them. Now, if they don't get arrested by local authority, then yes, ICE can arrest them too. So if I'm ICE, and I go and I say, I got to arrest this guy here because we have evidence that he committed a violent crime. And then this person over here is pushing me away, trying to get in the way. I can arrest them too because I have a warrant and I'm trying to lawfully arrest this person. Okay. And this person is obstructing. Now, if they're just standing there yelling obscenities at me and holding a sign saying this person's a good person, there's nothing wrong with that. Right. If they have a bullhorn, there is nothing wrong with that. Right. If they're doing many things, I would argue it's still not the time when ICE should go back and say, we're going to need more. Please invoke, more power, Mr. President, and send in more troops. So you've got the federal government that comes in to apply the law. And I would argue, and I say, focus on criminals, violent criminals. If you did that, then perhaps you would be having less pushback. But what about Articles 1 and 6 regarding the sanctuary cities? Well, I presume that the redhead means Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, which grants Congress the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. Now, again, nothing requires states or cities to cooperate, and federal courts have reiterated this. California's Senate Bill 54, which was passed in 2017, restricts state and local law enforcement from participating in federal immigration enforcement. That's all it does. It just says you cannot participate. Okay, well, there's nothing illegal about that. Whether Article 1 is applicable depends on what legislation any state or city has passed regarding the so-called sanctuary city. If their legislation is limited to just saying law enforcement cannot participate, they are not in violation. Okay? That's not how it works. Article 6, Clause 2, it establishes what we call the supremacy clause, right? It basically says federal laws are the supreme law of the land, and it binds state and local governments. But that only means from non-interference. If a state or if a state law or local policy conflicts with federal law, then federal law prevails, right? But that doesn't mean that they are obligated to participate and assist. And we have court cases for this. Prince versus United States, 1997. Murphy versus the NCAA, 2018. They ruled that the federal government cannot require action from local and state governments. City and County of San Francisco versus Trump, 2017. It blocked the withholding of federal funds because of being a sanctuary city. Okay, so this idea that sanctuary cities are automatically illegal is incorrect. If there's a violation of Article 1 or 6, it requires demonstrating more than just cities or states declining to assist, but they have to demonstrate active obstruction to federal laws. In other words, if Mayor Bass instructed the police to go line up in front of all the immigrants that were trying to, or surround immigrants and obstruct federal agents from arresting them, that would be a violation. It's not a violation because they're a sanctuary city. It's a violation because they're actively obstructing federal government from doing its duty. That's what those clauses mean. The redhead is, in fact, wrong. Okay. Now, what's interesting is, where do I want to go with this here? The idea that sanctuary cities exist should be supported by those who claim to support secession, states' rights or autonomy, or limited federal powers, or people that support the idea of defend the guard, which is legislation going through various states that says the government cannot call up the National Guard for foreign deployment unless Congress has declared war. That's to prevent the president from abusing the use of the National Guard. Well, it stands to reason that if you can object to foreign abuse by the president, you should be able to object to domestic abuse by the president as well. So my verdict, sanctuary cities are not inherently illegal. What would be illegal is, are they actively obstructing the federal government from doing its job? Now let's go back to Tom Holman's comments. He was like, oh, what Trump was elected to do. You might remember that in 2024, Trump beat Kamala Harris 49.9% by 48.4%. He did not win by a landslide. But even more to the point, in California, he not only did not win, he really didn't win by a landslide. So if you look, you can see that 58.5% of voters voted for Kamala Harris, whereas only 38.3% voted for Donald Trump. He lost by a landslide in California. In other words, in California, he has no mandate. And if he has a mandate because he eked out a win nationally, then it stands to reason that he doesn't have a mandate in California. So if you go and you look up the Migration Policy Institute's numbers, they will tell you that there's approximately 11 million illegal immigrants in the United States. That's their estimate. And if you compare their state-by-state estimations to states won and lost by Trump in the 2024 election, you come up with Trump won about 31 states, and that comprises of about 4.6 million of the 11 million illegal immigrants. And the states where Kamala Harris won comprises of about 6.4 million. So close to half. Now, California has likely the largest migrant population, legal or illegal, but arguably was a poor choice for Donald Trump to start with. He could have removed almost half just by starting in red states. And I argue that would have made the whole issue a lot easier and simpler and reduced a lot of the problems that we're having. right? Because he's starting in a blue state where they didn't even want it anyway. So now he has to, and then when you're starting a mass deportation program, if you will, there are going to be some problems. You should probably work in a friendly state so that you can work out those problems with the least amount of obstruction or complication. That way you can kind of, like show success. So if you go to all the red states, there's 31 of them, and you say we're going to do mass deportations in the red states first, and then once the blue states see it, they're going to either want it or they're going to recognize there's not much they can do about it because we'll have ironed out all the problems that we're going to have in a friendly state. That would have been a far better path for the Trump administration to choose. And the reason I'm pointing this out, the reason I point that out with Abrego Garcia is I believe that the government, the federal government, has done this all wrong and caused a lot of the problems that we're having, that we're seeing. They could have done this far easier and they chose not to. So I'm left to kind of wonder, maybe they want the conflict. Because if you go to a blue state, a state that rejected you, and you say, we're going to impose this upon you, even though you didn't want it, and then it gets into this big fight between the state and the city and the federal government, then what ends up happening? Well, things escalate. And then at some point, the government can go, see, it was a problem. We got to fix this. Okay, well, yeah, it was a problem for your own doing. So perhaps you do something differently. All right, let's watch, I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip that video maybe, or let me think. Yeah, oh, that's where, okay, so I moved my Abrego Garcia. That's okay. We'll touch upon that in a minute. So let me play this this next clip here. That would be clip 8. I told you there's a lot to go through today, and I'm gonna have to skip a thing or two, but we'll be all right. Here we go.
Tom, it's Lydia Hu, and I want to ask you a little bit more about these Democrat demands that ICE agents be unmasked. Some Democrats are saying that if they don't unmask, they're threatening to dox them. Listen to this.
I don't know of any police department that routinely wears masks. We know that there are other groups that routinely wear masks. NSC 131 routinely wears masks.
Sending masked men to snatch, kidnap, and disappear immigrants of all legal statuses across the country.
Every single one of them, no matter what it takes, no matter how long it takes, will of course be identified.
Tom, I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit. Explain to us more, help everyone understand the threat that our ICE agents are facing by just doing their job, why they need to wear these masks, and also what actions need to be taken against Democrats who are demanding that they be unmasked, and what would happen if they do dox them and at least publish their identities.
Look, it's incredible. We're at a place where the guys, the men and women who enforce law, they're the bad guys, and the ones who break the law are the victims. You kidding me? How come they didn't say anything about BLM? They're out there. They were a mask. How about the protesters, all the college campers that were protesting against Israel and the Jewish students? They were wearing masks. I didn't hear a word about that for these protesters wearing masks.
Okay, so there's a reason, Mr. Holman, that you didn't hear about them wearing masks. They are not part of the government. Okay, they are citizens. Citizens have the right to go and express their feelings about various policies, and they are not obligated to tell you who they are. This country has a long history of anonymity, starting with Benjamin Franklin, right? He wrote a bunch of letters under pen names intentionally when he was a young lad, and that made news. It's been part of our country for citizens to make arguments without having their identities exposed. Government, however, is entirely different because government, unlike citizens, they have a monopoly on force. When you have a monopoly on force, when you are instituting laws, when you are enforcing these laws, things are different for you than when you're somebody that's criticizing all of that. Right or wrong, it doesn't matter. By the way, there were some people on January 6th that were also in mask. Okay, I noticed he didn't mention that. Just pointing that out. When I was in Bosnia in 2002, we were explicitly told we could not wear face masks because of the history of death squads, right? The idea, face mask and government, they have too much negative history to be acceptable in most cases. Now, if you're arresting a drug kingpin like Scarface at his armed compound, okay, fair enough. If you're going into the home base of MS-13 or Tren de Agua, sure. If you're arresting individuals for violent crimes that local, state, and federal law enforcement officers do daily, no, you shouldn't be wearing a mask. Okay? You wear a mask when there's an extraordinary level of threat that you cannot avoid. But I argue, from a libertarian perspective, that the way the Trump administration has approached this, they have created many of the problems that we're having. Not all of them, right? Like there are some problems that can, sanctuary cities maybe, doing things that are allowing more immigrants to come in and maybe get onto Social Security and do these other things and use services that they shouldn't be using, primarily because they haven't paid for them, but also because maybe the services shouldn't even be in existence. Conversation for a different day. But at the bare minimum, if you have not paid for a service, you should have no access to it. It's pretty simple, right? So I'm not absolving necessarily these sanctuary cities or the various Democrats. They play their own role. But what I'm talking about is what led up and what caused this civil unrest. And I say the government has largely caused it. They have some responsibility to play in this. And part of it, it relies on understanding the laws, understanding what is and is not permissible, also understanding timelines of things and saying, okay, looking at all this information, you were deliberately trying to get around the rule of law, which you would not permit a regular citizen to do. For a libertarian, if I have to follow a law, the government has to follow a law. I cannot go randomly hit my neighbor with a brick. Neither can the government. They can't go randomly hit somebody with a brick. Okay? Furthermore, if the Trump administration had went about this all differently, much of this hiding, in my opinion, wouldn't be necessary. But it is sadly humorous that many civil libertarians who support recording an officer seem to suddenly support masked agents, rendering the recording that they previously supported pointless. Let's go on to my next clip here. I don't want to run out of time.
The U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi just announced yesterday that Kilmar Abrego Garcia, another now familiar name in this whole wider drama, has actually been brought back to the United States after being deported to El Salvador. Here she is detailing his alleged crimes.
Garcia has played a significant role in an alien smuggling ring. They found this was his full-time job, not a contractor. Thousands of illegal aliens were smuggled. This defendant trafficked firearms and narcotics throughout our country.
And Tom, in spite of these details, some Democrats are still on the bandwagon here, it seems. Watch this.
The Trump administration and all his cronies who should apologize to the country for putting us through this unnecessary situation, and to Abrego Garcia for putting him through this situation.
Otherwise, he has a status which is withhold deportation.
Now they're trying to act like he's some kind of drug lord or human trafficker.
Van Hollen's an embarrassment to the halls of Congress. He went over and collared an MS-13 gang member, a designated terrorist, a wife beater, and a public safety threat. And as we continue to do the investigation, now he's a human trafficker who trafficked not just guns and weapons, but people, trafficking of women and children. So he's going to pay, we're going to prosecute him. So we're bringing him back here to prosecute him. We're bringing him back here to put him in prison.
Okay.
When he's done in prison.
Okay. And he goes on to say when he's done in prison, he's going to get deported. I don't have an issue with that necessarily. The problem with this case, as I pointed out earlier, is the order in which events and information occurred. Abrego was deported a month prior to any public mention of human trafficking, or even before the news broke about allegations over domestic abuse. The administration acknowledged early on that he wasn't even supposed to be deported to El Salvador, right? So again, the government has to follow the rules. If they don't follow the rules, why should citizens? Why should anybody? They also did all of that clandestinely. I talked about it in a prior episode. I said that the federal government, it really looks, I mean, I can't prove it, but when you lay it out, it really kind of makes the case that, hey, they were trying to evade judicial review because they knew that they didn't have an airtight case. And then after things, all hell broke loose, then what did the government do? They started coming out with information. I was like, oh yeah, well, he's this, but you've already deported him to a supermax prison. That was the problem. The problem isn't that they're trying to enforce the law. It's the way in which you do it. If you remember the movie Ender's Game, at the very end, he's flipping out. And he said, the way you win matters. The way you enforce law matters. In fact, I will argue it matters more than whether or not citizens are obeying the law. Because again, government has a monopoly on force. They can do things and get away with it that citizens cannot. That is the problem. And so my argument here today is that a lot of this civil unrest lays squarely at the feet of the administration for the way in which they've done this, right? Like they should have went out and spent their time finding violent killers and come out and said, look, we got one. This dude, he killed 7 people. Here's the 7 people. We're getting rid of him. And you know what? Virtually nobody would have objected. They would have been like, man, you killed 7 people. You got evidence. You got him on videotape. He's admitted it, whatever the case may be, right? We would have been like, yeah, get rid of him. Send him on his way. But what happened was people got sent and we were like, well, wait a minute. You're sending them to a prison for terrorists in a third world country. Perhaps they should have done something more than just be here illegally, right? And that's how it started. So I think that the administration caused a lot of its own problems. All right, let me jump here. Let me jump to some of these images here because I want to try to wind this down. Okay, so let's see here. So you've got this image here. What about things like this? Right now, I've already discussed that you can freely wave the flag. You can go to a protest and wave a flag. I don't care. Neither should you. But look at that. It says F ICE. Not a big fan of that, but not necessarily illegal. It's free speech. However, it is on a burnt car. Is that car, the man who's in front of it, does he own that car? If he doesn't, and he's the one that burnt the car, then he's wrong and he should be punished, right? Same goes for this image here, right? I think it might be the same car. It's just a different image, right? Whoever burnt this car probably burnt somebody else's car. That's damage to property. You should be arrested for that. Even if it was an ICE car, because at the end of the day, I, as a tax-paying citizen, have to pay for that. I don't want to pay for that, right? And it's not like the government's going to go, oh, we lost the car. Oh, well, no big deal. Maybe in the future, if we do really good, we'll get a bonus. Like, that's not how it's going to work. They're going to be like, yo, we need to replace this car. And they're probably going to be like, we need to replace it with more bells and whistles, which is going to do what? It's going to drive up the cost. Oh man, my little audio didn't. I had that wrong. Boom. It's going to drive up the cost. Okay. Take a look at this one here. This image, I actually saw this image posted on social media and it was like, should this be allowed? Well, from what I can tell, just in this image, I think there's video that says otherwise, but just in this image, there's a man on a motorcycle waving a Mexican flag. Not illegal. It's not a problem. Freedom of speech. Now, I will say this. If you are fighting for a better immigration system and you are siding with or associating with people that are causing destruction and harm to people, you are hurting your own movement. So while I may not be on the side of Democrats, I'm not on the side of Republicans either. I'm somewhere in the middle and I'm looking and I'm saying, what's going on? What is the rule of law? What are the limitations that government should be adhering to? Those are the things that I'm going to consider when I look and say, what should be done about it? Do I think that they should be calling in the National Guard? Not necessarily, because I think that the administration, I think there's a strong argument to be made that they caused a lot of this problem. And if they had done it an entirely different way, then it wouldn't have been a problem. That's what I say. Right. And I think the evidence shows that, from deporting Abrego Garcia and others all the way to sending ICE to California. Why didn't you send ICE to Alabama? I don't know the numbers there off the top of my head, but they've got some illegal immigrants. Start there. Start small and deliver the wins with fewer problems and build your way up such that by the time you get to California, you've worked out any issues that come with mass deportations, right? And you've worked out, hey, in the mind of the public, if you're going after violent criminals first and you're just showing us left and right, look at this person we got, look at this person. They did more than just cross the border illegally. They hurt a little child. This person, they hurt a woman. This person, they killed somebody's brother. Just go after them. All of them. Get rid of them. I'm okay with it. I've said this before. If you find Tren de Aragua and they have committed a violent crime and you prove it, right? And you send them on their way to El Salvador, I have no problem with that, right? Because you should go to a prison. And if the prison in El Salvador is cheaper for the American people, I don't really have a problem with that. Is it more dangerous? Well, once you go to prison, you're in danger, period, right? There's a limitation on how well you can be protected. It's just the fact that's the nature of the game, right? You send a pedophile to prison, everybody knows they don't last very long because even prisoners have their limits, right? So the idea of going to prison is already dangerous in the first place. People die in prison all the time. Not to say that's a good thing. I don't necessarily say it's acceptable, but it's a fact of life. So at this point, if you're a violent criminal from another country and we've proven it, get rid of you, deport them. But start with those people first. We shouldn't be having the argument of Abrego Garcia in the first place. When the government said, we're deporting this man, they should have been easily able to right away, snap my fingers, right away, say, oh, no, don't worry. This dude's a bad dude. He's a bad hombre. Look at all these things. It shouldn't have taken a month for that information to come out. That was failure on the federal government's part. It was failure on the federal government's part to go into California when they could have went into some other state and done the same thing, right? Their job, in my opinion, actually, you know what? That begs the question. What is the answer? Like, should we support mass deportations? I oppose mass deportations when they come to, again, administrative crimes. David Nolan, the founder of the Libertarian Party, he ran for office in 2010, and he was asked about the border. I want to play the video, and I want you to hear what he had to say, because I think this is instructive, and this is the proper libertarian position.
How do you balance securing the border with protecting civil liberties?
If you're a libertarian, this should appeal to you, I would hope.
As a libertarian, I believe civil liberties should always be protected. I think often in times of trouble, this country has a tendency to overreact to the crisis of the day. Much of the problem on our national borders, I believe, stems from the fact that we have made it far too difficult for well-intentioned, good, honest people to get into this country. We need to make it far easier for people who wish to come here to work, to raise a family, to start a business, and at the same time, make it more difficult for people with bad intentions. If we allowed in the 95% plus who are good, honest people to come here with minimum paperwork and minimum hassle, you could then presume that the people trying to get across the border illicitly were there for bad purposes. After all, if they were here for good purposes and could prove that they were not terrorists, that they were not laden with communicable diseases, that they were not criminals, we could assume that the remaining small handful sneaking across the border at night were here for bad purposes, and it would be far easier for the National Guard or whomever we wanted to station on the border to intercept them.
Let me tell you something. Okay, so we don't need to see that part. We just wanted to see the David Nolan clip, and it was the easiest for me to grab. So I think he's correct. Government should focus on defending property and people, first and foremost. That is their role. If they're not doing that, then we should have, like, if they're doing something else, then perhaps it should be a smaller department that's dedicated to something different, right? Maybe they're dealing with fraud or something like that. Or maybe they're mediating between two people that are in conflict, whatever. But they should dedicate resources to violent criminals. The federal government should remain mindful and invoke supremacy power only when they have no other choice. So far as what we've seen, it doesn't appear that they're willing to do that. They're leaping right in, and they're going to It's like they're trying to take on the biggest, baddest dude in the prison yard rather than working their way up. Well, when you do that, you make a lot of mistakes. And unfortunately, when you have a monopoly on power, on force, you are held to a higher standard. You should start in states where the mandate was supported. Why are you starting in California with your massive program? I'm sure ICE is in other states, but stay out of the blue ones for now, especially the ones that wildly rejected Trump's mandate. Because if you think about it, again, and I say this all the time, if Trump had a mandate by winning barely over a percent, then what does that say about the mandate in California when he lost by some 20 percentage points? It tells you the people of California don't want that mandate. That means perhaps that should be last on your list. Deal with the federal government should deal with illegal entrants and overstayed visas as they come across them, but they should not make them the focus. And in my opinion, I think they should pretty much ignore them. I think that would be a good place for amnesty for them only, but only. And I've laid out my case for that. Basically, the short version of that is to say, we create a system where we allow you to come in if we can't find any evidence that you've created a crime. But if, over a certain amount of time, we find out that you have committed a crime at some point and we just didn't know about it, then you're still subject to being deported. Like, I'm okay with that kind of a system, right? And then local law enforcement should deal with criminal behavior, burning down buildings, burning cars, throwing rocks at people. Now, if the federal government comes in and they send their ICE agents and they said, all right, we're going to go and arrest these people. They're hardcore, bad, terrible, violent criminals. We're going to arrest them. And then they start throwing rocks. Well, then, yes, you can arrest those people as well, right? Because again, you shouldn't be throwing rocks at people, right? If immigration were simplified, like Nolan's argument, I think it would reduce who they have to go after. It reduces the resources necessary. It reduces the conflict with local and state governments. It reduces the incentive for anyone to bring in mass people. Remember the whole argument of Biden's bringing in millions and millions of people? It reduces that because they can come in legally. It's very similar to prohibition. When you prohibit alcohol, guess what? There's a lot of people trying to sell alcohol illegally. But when you remove prohibition, guess what? Illegal sales of alcohol drop because it's harder to compete when it's out in the open. And then lastly, it reduces the need to protect citizens from violent crime because you have more people supporting what's going on. Here's my final thought. If the Trump administration were serious, they would jail the people and the companies and individuals who are hiring illegals. Now, I don't support that, but I'm just saying, if they really were, they would go to the red states and they would say, we're starting here. You gave us the mandate. We're going to remove illegal immigrants. Then what we're going to do is we're going to punish people that hired them in red states. I'm willing to bet that if they did that, that mandate would all of a sudden not be so strong, because I don't think that the American public really wants a consistent, coherent mandate that the federal government is trying to impose. But if they did, they can demonstrate that by starting where it was supported. All right, I've got to wrap this up and get out of here. So I'm going to take a couple more comments here real quick, and then we're going to get out of here. Hopefully, this gives you a good picture of a libertarian position. We support the individual rights. We support property, right? And everything should be able to be viewed within the lens of my three pillars. Those three pillars are self-ownership, they are the non-aggression principle, and they are freedom of association, right? And I didn't really talk about freedom of association, but at the end of the day, for me, if I want to marry, if I want to hire, or just be friends with somebody who's an illegal immigrant, the government should have no say. It's my freedom to choose who I want to associate with. I can associate with all Black people, all white people, all immigrants that are here legally, or all immigrants that are here illegally. That is my right. When they interfere, they are violating my right. They are also violating the rights of other people who might wish to extend that to reciprocate with me. So for me, I look and I say they're going down the wrong path. They're implementing the path that they're going down all badly, and we should not support it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I support what the Democrats are saying or doing as well. I oppose some of that. There are one of the clips that I had was an official that was out at a protest speaking and saying, we're going to do these things. That is not appropriate. You should not be doing that. Your job is to represent the totality of all the citizens that are within whatever district or region for which you got voted in for. So let me get to some of these comments here. On social media, on Twitter, David says, hi. How's it going there, David? Scientific Libertarian says, to be fair, that's just a normal day at Home Depot. That's true. It is normal day at Home Depot, having all the immigrants there, I think is what he was referring to. Customers really get annoyed when they don't have straight 2x4s. I'm not sure what that's going for, but you are correct. You know how many times I go to Home Depot and I'm all like, or there's that picture, you can look it up. It's a meme. And it's like, I found the tree for which all the Lowe's material comes from, all the Lowe's wood comes from. And it's like this tree with all these twists and turns. And by the way, I cannot put the Twitter comments up on the screen, so I apologize for that. Let's see. I saw something in here. It said, where did it go here? DL's start time is unpredictable. I apologize, folks. I really meant to have it at 7:30 this morning, and I am working hard to make it consistently every day at 1:30, but sometimes I got to do what I've got to do. So, all right, let's see what else. DL is like a wizard. He arrives exactly when he means to, Time Surfing Alien says. That's true, but I do mean to. I am working to make that time that I arrive consistent all the time. All right, folks, that's my show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I am going to get up out of here, and I will see you tomorrow, hopefully on time. With that, have a good one. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.